Hello once again, and welcome to A River Between Chaos and Zen, the poetry podcast from Creative Actors Lab. My name is Max. Kelly, as always, sends her love. Of which, by the way, I should say Kelly is also doing a podcast concerning literature, which is so her thing. I mean, just being the English major, and it's so well suits her to do something like that. And if you're not checking it out, what's wrong with you? Come on, get on it. Let's go. But but for today, I wanted to get into this one for a little bit. I would like to read part of chapter one of the Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. And this thing is a riot. If you've ever read James Joyce to any degree, and I hadn't read him in forever, and it was a very limited sort of a thing. I knew him because back in school in theater, I was the weird kid, and I really got into Samuel Beckett. And it turned out Samuel Beckett was actually a student, or he was the assistant to James Joyce, and Joyce was his mentor. James Joyce is a trip, kids, and just in this particular thing, it's just the language it's written in. It's just, you'll see, but it's just I don't even know how to describe it. I don't even know how to describe it, but being that I came from my mom's family coming from England. And there was just in this he was Irish, but there's just so much that in the phraseology and the colloquialisms is just, it brings back a lot of memories, and I had to research this one a lot because there were just turns of phrase and expressions all over the place I had no bloody idea about. But one of the first things it talks about something called lemon platt, and I'm like, what in the name of God is that? Turns out it's lemon sweets. It's which just to digress, lemon flavored desserts are like one of my favorite things ever. So, but I saw that, and that's in the very beginning. I was like, oh, I love this. But anyway, and also in my research. About this, that there's a book, I don't believe it's even in print anymore, but you can find it on the internet if you Google around, selected letters of James Joyce, and some of them he wrote to his wife, and oh my, if you're, when you take into consideration the time and the place he was in, and a lot of the language and the verbiage that he was using. These people who write stuff like the 50 Shades of Grey and stuff like that, and just erotica for the masses in general, light compared to what James Joyce was writing, is quite enlightening. And it is not for the faint of heart. Believe me, if you are easily offended, you don't want to go reading that, but it's very just his use of language overall, regardless of what he's talking about. It's got a music and a poetry all its own, and I don't know how to describe it, and that's probably what makes it so great. Without further ado, part of chapter one, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Chapter one. Here we go. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down the road, and this moo cow that was coming down along the road met a nicest little boy named Baby Tuckoo. His father told him that story. His father looked at him through a glass. He had a hairy face. He was Baby Tuckoo. The moo cow came down the road where Betty Byrne lived. She sold lemon platt. Oh, the wild rose blossoms on the little green place. He sang that song. That was his song. Oh, the green wathe botheth. And when you wet the bed, it is first it is warm and then it is cold. His mother put on the oil sheet that had a queer smell. His mother had a nicer smell than his father. She played on the piano the sailor's hornpipe for him to dance. He danced, tra-la-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la-la, laddie, tra-la-la-la-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la-la. Uncle Charles and Dante clapped. They were older than his father and mother, but Uncle Charles was older than Dante. Dante had two brushes in her press. The brush with the maroon velvet back was for Michael Davitt, and the brush with the green velvet back was for Parnell. Dante gave him a cachou every time he brought her a piece of tissue paper. The Vances lived in number 7. They were a different father and mother. They were Eileen's father and mother. When they grew up, he was going to marry Eileen. He hid under the table. His mother said, "Oh, Stephen, apologize." Dante said, "Oh, if not, the eagles will come and pluck out his eyes, pluck out his eyes, apologize, apologize, pluck out his eyes, apologize, pull out his eyes, pull out his eyes, apologize." Then apparently we go to where he is in school. The wide playgrounds were swarming with boys. They were shouting, and the prefects urged them on with strong cries. The evening air was pale and chilly, and after every charge and thud of the footballers, the greasy leather orb flew like the heavy bird through the gray light. He kept on the fringe of his line, out of sight of his prefect, out of the reach of the rude feet, feigning to run now and then. He felt his body small and weak amid the throng of players, and his eyes were weak and watery. Roddy Kickham was not like that. He would be captain of the third line, all the fellows said. Roddy Kickham was a decent fellow, but Nasty Roche was a stink. Roddy Kickham had Greaves in his number and a hamper in the refectory. Nasty Roche had big hands. He called the Friday pudding dog on the blanket. And one day he had asked, "What is your name?" Stephen had answered, "Stephen Daedalus." Then Nasty Roche had said, "What kind of name is that?" And when Stephen had not been able to answer, Nasty Roche had asked, "What is your father?" Stephen had answered, "A gentleman." Then Nasty Roche had asked, "Is he a magistrate?" He crept about from point to point on the fringe of his line, making little runs now and then, but his hands were bluish with cold. He kept his hands in the side pockets of his belted gray suit. That was a belt round his pocket, and the belt would also give a fellow a belt. One day a fellow said to Cantrell, "I'll give you such a belt in a second." Cantrell had answered, "Go and fight your match. Give Cecil Thunder a belt. I'd like to see you. He'd give you a toe in the rump for yourself." That was not a nice expression. His mother had told him not to speak with the rough boys in college. Nice mother. The first day in the hall of the castle, when she had said goodbye, he had put up her veil double over her nose to kiss him. Her nose and eyes were red, but he had pretended not to see that she was going to cry. She was a nice mother, but she was not so nice when she cried. And his father had given him 2 5-shilling pieces for pocket money, and his father had told him that if he wanted anything to write home to him, and whatever he did, never to peach on a fellow. Then, at the door of the castle, the rector had shaken hands with his father and mother, his soutane fluttering in the breeze, and the car had driven off with his father and mother in it. They had cried to him from the car, waving their hands, "Goodbye, Stephen, goodbye, goodbye, Stephen, goodbye." He was caught in a whirl in the scrimmage and, fearful of the flashing eyes and muddy boots, bent down to look through the legs. The fellows were struggling and groaning, and their legs were rubbing and kicking and stamping. Then Jack Lawton's yellow boots dodged out the ball, and all the other boots and legs ran after. He ran after them a little way and then stopped. It was useless to run on. Soon they would be going home for the holidays. After supper in the study hall, he would change the number pasted up inside his desk from 77 to 76. It would be better to be in the study hall than out there in the cold. The sky was pale and cold, but there were lights in the castle. He wondered from which window Hamilton Rowan had thrown his hat on the ha-ha, and had there been flower beds at the time under the windows. One day, when he had been called to the castle, the butler had shown him the marks of the soldiers' slugs in the wood of the door, and had given him a piece of shortbread that the community ate. It was nice and warm to see the lights in the castle. It was like something in a book. Perhaps Leicester Abbey was like that. And there were nice sentences in Dr. Cornwell's spelling book. They were like poetry, but they were only sentences to learn spelling from. Wolsey died in Leicester Abbey, where the abbots buried him. Canker is a disease of plants, cancer one of animals. It would be nice to lie in the hearth rug before the fire, leaning his head upon his hands to think of those sentences. He shivered as if he had cold, slimy water next to his skin. That was mean of Wells to shoulder him in the square ditch because he would not swap his little snuff box for Wells' seasoned hacking chestnut, the conqueror of 40. How cold and slimy the water had been. The fellow had once seen a big rat jump into the scum. The mother was sitting at the fire with Dante, waiting for Bridget to bring the tea. She had her feet on the fender, and her jewelry slippers were so hot, and they had such a lovely warm smell. Dante knew a lot of things. She had taught him where the Mozambique Channel was, and what was the longest river in America, and what was the name of the highest mountain in the moon. Father Arnell knew more than Dante because he was a priest, but both his father and Uncle Charles said that Dante was a clever woman and a well-read woman. And Dante made that noise after dinner, and then put her hand to her mouth. That was heartburn. A voice cried far out in the playground, "All in!" Then the other voices cried from the lower and third lines, "All in! All in!" The players closed around, flushed and muddy, and he went among them, glad to go in. Rory Kickham held the ball by its greasy lace. A fellow had asked him to give it one last, but he walked on without even answering the fellow. Simon Moonan told him not to because the prefect was looking. The fellow turned to Simon Moonan and said, "We all know why you speak. You are McGlade's suck." Suck was a queer word. The fellow called Simon Moonan that name because Simon Moonan used to tie the prefect's false sleeves behind his back, and the prefect used to let on to be angry. But the sound was ugly. Once he had washed his hands in the lavatory of the Wickham Hotel, and his father pulled the stopper up by the chain, and the dirty water went down through the hole in the basin, and when it all had gone down slowly, the hole in the basin had made the sound like that. Suck, only louder. To remember that, and the white look of the lavatory made him feel cold and then hot. There were two cocks that you turned and the water came out, cold and hot. He felt cold and then a little hot. And he could see the names printed on the cocks. That was a very queer thing. And the air in the corridor chilled him too. It was queer and wettish. But soon the gas would be lit, and in burning it made a light noise like a little song. Always the same, and when the fellows stopped talking in the playroom, you could hear it. For it was the hour of sums. Father Arnold wrote a hard sum on the board and then said, "Now then, who will win? Go ahead, York. Go on, Lancaster." Stephen tried his best, but the sum was too hard and he felt confused. The little silk badge and the white rose on it that was pinned on the breast of his jacket began to flutter. He was no good at sums, but he tried his best so that York might not lose. Father Arnold's face looked very black, but he was not in a wax. He was laughing. Then Jack Lawton cracked his fingers and Father Arnold looked at his copybook and said, "Right, bravo, Lancaster. The red rose wins. Come on now, York, forge ahead." Jack Lawton looked over from his side. The little silk badge with the red rose on it looked very rich because he had a blue sailor top on. Stephen felt his own face red too, thinking of all the bets about who would get first place in elements, Jack Lawton or he. Some weeks Jack Lawton got the card for first, and some weeks he got the card for first. His white silk badge fluttered and fluttered, and he worked at the sum and heard Father Arnold's voice. Then all his eagerness passed away, and he felt his face quite cool. He thought his face must be white because it felt so cool. He felt not get out the answer for the sum, but it did not matter. White roses and red roses, those were beautiful colors to think of. And all the cards in first place and second place and third place were beautiful colors too. Pink and cream and lavender. Lavender and cream and pink roses were beautiful to think of. Perhaps a wild rose might be like those colors when he remembered the song about the wild rose blossoms on the little green place. But you could not have a green rose, but perhaps somewhere in the world you could. The bell rang, and the bell rang, and then the classes began to file out of the rooms and along the corridors towards the refectory. He sat looking at the 2 prints of butter on his plate, but he could not eat the damp bread. The tablecloth was damp and limp, but he drank off the hot wheat tea with which the clumsy scullion, girt with a white apron, poured into his cup. He wondered whether the scullion's apron was damp too, or whether all white things, were cold and damp. Nasty Rocher and Sorin drank the cocoa that their people sent them in tins. Then they said they could not drink the tea, that it was hogwash. Their fathers were magistrates, the fellows said. All the boys seemed to him very strange. They all had fathers and mothers and different clothes and voices. He longed to be at home and lay his head on his mother's lap, but he could not. And he so longed for the play and the study and the prayers to be over and to be in bed. He drank another cup of hot tea, and Fleming said, "What's up? Have you a pain, or what's up with you?" "I don't know," Stephen said. Sick in your bread basket, Fleming said, "because your face looks all white. It will go away." "Oh, yes," Stephen said. But he was not sick there. He thought that he was sick in his heart if you could be sick in that place. Fleming was very decent to ask him. He wanted to cry. He leaned his elbows on the table and shut and opened the flaps of his ears. Then he heard the noise of the refectory every time he opened the flaps of his ears. It made a roar like a train at night. And when he closed the flaps, the roar was shut off like a train going into a tunnel. That night at Dalkey, the train had roared like that, and then when it went into the tunnel, the roar stopped. He closed his eyes, and the train went on, roaring and then stopping, roaring again, stopping. It was nice to hear it roar and stop and then roar out of the tunnel again and then stop. Then the higher line fellows began to come down along the matting in the middle of the refectory. Patty Rath and Jimmy McGee and the Spaniard who was allowed to smoke cigars and the little Portuguese who wore the woolly cap. And then the lower line tables and the tables of the third line, and every single fellow had a different way of walking. He sat in the corner of the playroom pretending to watch a game of dominoes, and once or twice he was able to hear for an instant a little song of the gas. The prefect was at the door with some boys, and Simon Moonan was knotting his false sleeves, and he was telling them something about Tullabeg. Then he went away from the door, and Wells came over to Stephen and said, "Tell us, Daedalus, do you kiss your mother before you go to bed?" Stephen answered, "I do." Wells turned to the other fellows and said, "Oh, say, here's a fellow says he kisses his mother every night before he goes to bed." The other fellows stopped their game and turned around laughing. Stephen blushed under his eyes and said, "I do not." Wells said, "Oh, I say, here's a fellow says he doesn't kiss his mother before he goes to bed." They all laughed again. Stephen tried to laugh with them. He felt his whole body hot and confused in the moment. What was the right answer to the question? He had given two, and still Wells laughed. But Wells must know the right answer, for he was in third of grammar. He tried to think of Wells' mother, but he did not dare to raise his eyes to Wells' face. He did not like Wells' face. It was Wells who had shouldered him in the square ditch the day before because he would not swap his little snuff box for Wells' seasoned hacking chestnut, the Conqueror of 40. It was a mean thing to do. All the fellows said it was. And how cold and slimy the water had been, and a fellow had once seen a big rat jump plop into the scum. The cold slime of the ditch covered his whole body, and when the bell rang for study and the lines filed out of the playrooms, he felt the cold air of the corridor and the staircase inside his clothes. He still tried to think of what was the right answer. Was it right to kiss his mother or wrong to kiss his mother? What did it mean to kiss? You put your face up like that to say goodnight, and then his mother put her face down. That was to kiss. His mother put her lips on his cheek. Her lips were soft and they wetted his cheek, and they made a tiny little noise. Kiss. Why did people do that with their two faces? Sitting in the study hall, he opened the lid of his desk and changed the number pasted up inside from 77 to 76. But it was Christmas, but the Christmas vacation was very far away. But one time it would come because the earth moved round always. There was a picture of the earth on the first page of his geography, a big ball in the middle of clouds. Fleming had a box of crayons, and one night during free study he had colored the earth green and the clouds maroon. That was like the two brushes of Dante's press, the brush with the green velvet back for Parnell and the brush with the maroon velvet back for Michael David. But he had not told Fleming to color them those colors. Fleming had done it himself. He opened the geography to study the lesson, but he could not learn the names of the places in America. Still, they were all different places that had different names. They were all in different countries, and the countries were in continents, and the continents were in the world, and the world was in the universe. He turned to the flyleaf of the geography and read what he had written there himself. His name and where he was. Stephen Daedalus, Class of Elements, Conglosewood College, Solins, County Kildare, Ireland, Europe, the world, the universe. That was in his writing. And Fleming, one night, for a cod, had written on the opposite page, "Stephen Daedalus is my name, Ireland is my nation, Conglowers is my dwelling place, and heaven my expectation. The one thought I have, and I had done this in several podcasts ago, I read some of my daughter Amber's children's stories, and just as I'm reading, just as I've read this, particularly just now, the flow of this reminds me of the way Amber writes, the way my little baby daughter, who is not a baby anymore, but will always be my baby. For some reason, the flow of this reminds me of the flow of the way my daughter writes. And if I may share, that just delights the absolute hell out of me. I'll go ahead and leave it there. This is the 20th episode of this thing. Just amazing. I just want to thank you all for your attention. Whether you're seeing us on YouTube, which not a lot of people do, but just in all the other, whether you're seeing this on video or you're just getting the audio on the different podcast platforms. I just sort of do this, and I don't pay a whole lot of attention to who's, to the numbers of all of this, but some folks are paying attention and being very kind and enjoying this, and I just want to say thank you for joining into this part of this exercise in my own self-education. Thank you for listening, and I always discover something new when I do this. I'm no scholar of anything, and I probably will. I'm a lifetime student, and it just gives me great joy to share this of poetry and of creative writing. Something I love very, very dearly. It's a gift from my grandfather. And this actually reminds me of him as well. But I digress. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. Until next time, may the long-time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. Until next time, may it be well, and I wish you peace.